guys, welcome back. Hope you're okay and living your best life here in 26. Hi. Right, I'm being brave and I'm going to do a video on dating. Like, who am I to tell people how to date or who to date? Well, quite frankly, I'm not. But I thought it'd be really interesting because I've read, as usual, a couple of articles that have inspired my views on dating and have also kind of made me reflect, because I suppose a lot of what I talk about is kind of anthropological. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of looking at human behaviors and patterns and identities and things like that. So this is what the video is about. And it's dating, but what's changed in the last 40 years? Now, I was not dating anybody 40 years ago because I wasn't really in a position to do so. And I imagine lots of you out there might not have been dating 40 years ago. But we can obviously say that things have culturally shifted since 1986, and that how people used to date and how people date today has changed. I mean, dating has changed in the last 25 years. Dating has changed in the last 15 years. So there's been some massive changes. And I feel like a lot of us are a little bit confused. Now, I'm not in a position to maybe talk as someone who is dating. I have been married for a very long time. But I do remember dating and I remember what it is like. So we're going to talk about what's changed, what's the kind of current situation, how did it used to look, and some strategies to kind of help us to date in this weird modern era of dating apps. So there's a bit of a psychological perspective, there's a sociological perspective, and there'll obviously be some data taken from various sources, including dating apps and sites themselves. So let's get down to it and let's uncover dating, a quick guide to what to do and not what to do. So, I don't think dating has changed particularly. I think what has changed is people have changed. And obviously, the internet has helped us to become more educated and more informed. And we progress through, time. Things that once were acceptable are maybe no longer acceptable, and things that weren't acceptable are now acceptable. So we have gone through a lot of changes, and we, are in an era now where there's the data seems to suggest that people aren't finding it as easy to partner up, or are not willing to compromise on certain things, and it's kind of reflecting all of this influx, I think, of information and maybe a little bit of too much information. We're going to not be looking at individuals here because, everyone's dating history is unique and personal to them. Anyone's choice to date is unique and personal to them. But we can only be the product of the environment that we find ourselves in. And I don't think that dating itself is that different. It's just that we are different and our expectations might be different. So I'm not giving dating advice per se, because that's not what this video is about. It's more an observational kind of exploration of dating, and from the information around us, and from what people say. And equally, I don't think we should always think about dating as something that teenagers or Gen Z or millennials or generationally doing. I think you can be 40 and divorced and dating again. I think you could be 17, your partner has passed, and dating again. I think you could be, in your 20s and not dating at all because you just don't feel that you want that. So again, it's more like we're looking at kind of the context of dating in 26 and what that looks like and what has changed. That's why we did the angle, or why I did the angle of what was happening in the 1986, what's happening now, and kind of what is the big shift here, because I feel like we should be looking at this from a bit of an educational perspective, because I always think that's interesting, isn't it? And as I've said, that we're constantly changing and evolving as a society, as people, and it's nice sometimes to take a little snapshot and see what things are like, or what things were like, and kind of measure those changes. So this is kind of what did dating look like 40 years ago? So I've got some data, I've got some facts, I've got some ideas. So let's have a look at what the situation was circa 1986. So it's 1986. What was dating going to look like back in the day? So, no, not massive shoulder pads, some very nice frosted highlights, and, maybe some like big hoop earrings. I don't know. We're not talking about the aesthetics of the 80s. We're talking about the kind of patterns and the rules and the kind of social construct of dating in 1986. So there were three big differences, and then maybe something that we've kind of forgotten. So, first of all, there were fewer choices. So think about this. You are not going to be bombarded with lots and lots of people. So originally, the biggest aspect of engagement probably was in high school, where you would be around the largest number of peers that were your age and at the same point of experience and in life. So, if you were younger, maybe that's where your first sort of dating furore would be, like, your first kisses, your first relationships, your first social interactions. Now, there weren't any smartphones, so you would have had to arrange to meet somebody. You would have had to maybe ring them on the landline and speak to their family members before you got to speak to them, or you would have had to physically meet them and be, sure that you would just be meeting each other. So that would have been the high school scenario. And then obviously college or work, university, depending on what your pathway was. But again, if you've gone into the workplace, you're not going to be surrounded by people who are necessarily the same age. People would have been settling down a lot younger in the 1980s, although things had started to change. But generally, people were marrying younger, having families sooner. So if you were in the workplace, you were kind of meeting people that, again, would have been in the same kind of contextual situation as you. So dating pools would have been smaller in the adult environment. And then from this smaller dating pool than the dating pool that is in 26, there would have been more mutual friends. People would have met each other through friends of. So, and when I reference like my parents who like used to hang around in a big social group in the 70s and kind of met each other, people would have dated each other and then obviously eventually settled and then kind of formed their kind of like, relationship. And yeah, so that was one of the big differences. And there was more built-in accountability. So if your mate was dating somebody that was your friend's or your girlfriend's friend, you weren't going to be like kind of endorsing shady behavior, were you? Like you weren't going to support them if they were cheating per se. It would have been kind of a bit abhorrent to have had that kind of experience. So the accountability can come through that shared social group, and also that people did know each other. Communities, were based on social networks, on real experiences and real environments, rather than this virtual environment that maybe we find ourselves in the 21st century. So that was, your bad date couldn't actually ghost you because they'd see you at the corner shop, they'd see you at the bar or the pub, they'd see you on the shop floor if you worked in the same place. There'd be places to see each other and run into each other. So it wasn't as easy to ghost. You didn't ghost. Ghosting didn't exist. That wasn't even a term back then. So that's one of the differences. Then third-party places. There were more third-party places to go. And I think this was very much the case probably until recently. And I think COVID kind of ruined this. But you could meet people in pubs, workplaces, clubs, and communities. Be that church community, be that like a class that you took with somebody else, be that, the office that you worked at. There were more third-party places. And in Britain, our culture of going to the pub, Friday nights and Saturday nights were big social nights. You'd go out and hang out there. You might all sit around together or be like looking at each other and eyeing each other up and that being drawn and attracted to each other. Even in like, non-heterosexual communities, there were still places and spaces you could go to find people to potentially date or to share interest in. So there was more repeated exposure because you might have seen people in these environments And the more you looked, the more you learned, the more you kind of discovered that you might have something in common and found this person attractive. So it wasn't all upfront. There was a bit of mystery and leaning into something and learning about a person and getting to know them. You know, the more you knew them, the more comfortable you felt with. And then there were clearer scripts. There was more understanding of the rules of dating and what was fair and what was good and what was accurate. So there was more predictable milestones and less negotiation. Like, you know, apart from like, are we serious? Are we formal? I mean, there was none of this kind of situationship, which is a term we hear around where kind of something's happening, but it's not happening. It was either you are dating or you're not dating, and everybody was familiar with that and understood what that looked like. And then the rules were very clearly established. You weren't going to fade away eventually. If you decided you don't want to see somebody, you'd have to have the awkward conversation. And maybe this is something where, even though in the modern era, the communication is, you know, supposedly the formats and ways we can communicate is so much better and easier than it was 40 years ago. We were actually a lot better at having honest, face-to-face conversations and having more integrity in our relationship. So again, don't come at me. This is just, again, a little thought. However, there would have been downsides to this. So maybe the roles would have been more rigid and it was harder to kind of, you know, if you're in a relationship where you didn't want to be with somebody, maybe it was harder to get out of. I mean, again, this is a hypothesis. Maybe there was less choice and people ended up going with people because they got to a certain age and it was this person or nobody. You know, again, there might be people that you know that ended up in those situations with, you know, they didn't have this selective approach because it wasn't really something that was around at the time. And also maybe there was less safety and you didn't realize what you were encountering. So there were some things to think about really at this point, a little bit more on the kind of data behind what I've just talked about then. So the 1986 kind of scenario. Now dating is often mediated by platforms, and in the US, 30% of adults have used a dating app site and 9% used one in the past year. And that is from Pew Research Centre, and that data is from 2022. In the UK, Ofcom reported 1 in 10 adults, that's 4.9 million, used an online dating service, while major apps saw user decline. So Tinder is down 600,000, Bumble down 200,000. So this is from ofcom.org.uk. So that's the, you know, evidence to show that we are not doing what we were doing in the 80s. We were not sitting in bars, meeting each other, making eye contact. We weren't at the clubs, hanging out together. We weren't like flirting in the office. We're more on the apps and looking for compatibility maybe. So relationship scripts got rewritten. So there's only data to kind of support this. So less default pressure to marry young. We are more likely to cohabitate, and therefore milestones have moved. So I'm actually not sure what the average age for marrying is now, but I do know at one point it was 27, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was more in the 30s now in the UK, but I will check on that data, and see if I can put it somewhere in the video. What else? England and Wales, the average, actually I do have it here, the average age at first marriage rose substantially from 1980. So 1980, we were marrying younger. So again, if you think about Princess Di in 1981, she was 19, but I don't think everybody was like screaming, child bride, which they probably would do. I mean, if we think of Millie Bobby Brown recently getting married and she's in her early 20s, everyone's like, that's really young. So again, that cultural shift we can obviously see. So this data is from the Office for National Statistics, although it doesn't give me any actual ages. So again, I will have a little look into that. And the US Census Time series shows the median age at first marriage has trended upwards long term. So again, this is also a pattern in the United States that the age has increased. So more choice and more negotiation was something I just talked about. Fluid now in these perimeters. And I suppose that I know a couple of people who are friends and contemporaries of my parents who were married to or in heterosexual relationships in the 80s, even though their sexuality, bisexual or same-sex orientated. And actually those marriages failed because, you know, they were denying maybe an aspect of their sexuality. And now, you know, they've repartnered and are in different relationships because, again, in the 1980s, it wasn't as liberal and it wasn't as kind of it was more structured and more rigid, as I said, and kind of having to conform to particular roles and identities. So that is, again, something to think about. And also something that's probably 21st century, and I did sort of touch upon this in my sort of intro section, contemporary discourse increasingly normalizes deliberate singlehood. It is becoming great. And I've seen a lot of articles and think pieces talking about, why being single is cool and why having a boyfriend isn't a cool thing anymore, or having a girlfriend. It has changed. So deliberate singlehood, we are decentering men, and this is a viral framing as of 25. And there was an article 3 days ago out on this, and this was from Vox. So again, I'll probably link or clip to that article. And Pew shows the share of single Americans looking is lower than in 2019. So 42% in 22 versus 49% in 2019. So that's from the Pew Research Center. So we are not centering ourselves around relationships in the same way as we were in the 1980s. So again, take from that what you will. Big question is, we know that it was like that in 1986 or the 80s, and we know that it's different today. So exactly what changed and why, and I think I've already touched upon this a little bit. So first of all, dating became a marketplace. We've heard that, it's a bit like a cattle market. When I was going out back in the day, people would often say that, it's like a cattle market in here and people are just out to meet each other. But then it literally became a marketplace. And that became because of online dating. So Match.com was invented in the mid-90s, 1995, I believe, according to Wikipedia. And then this sort of changed the platform, didn't it? And when I was younger, so in the early 2000s, online dating was kind of a thing that you didn't do. It was a bit like desperate people do online dating. Go forward 10 years and the advent of applications or dating apps, and suddenly the whole dating landscape changed because they were on your smartphones or on your tablets. It was accessible in a completely different way. And then Tinder arrived in 2012 with its swiping, and then revolutionized all the dating. The UK smartphone ownership was at 39% in 2012 and already rapidly rising. So smartphones were really changing how people were dating. So apps meant that there was infinite choice. And suddenly it could be global as well. Like, you could connect with people in different parts of the world as much as you could date the people local to you. And then that infinite choice meant that you were going to become more comparable, or there was more scope to compare. And I've heard this say, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think in this case, it has, because we became very picky and it became very down to quantitative things that we were looking at. So, what was the difference between that blonde-haired, blue-eyed person or that 6 foot? We would be looking at these people and measuring them on their physical variance without really getting to know who they were or their personality. And then this led to this feeling of people becoming disposable. So just like I go onto Amazon Marketplace and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for a Hoover or a vacuum cleaner. Sorry, I'm from Britain. There are other brands available, but looking for a vacuum cleaner. So I'm going to sit there and look at all the specs and I'm going to decide which one suits me. This is what we started to do with people. And people aren't a commodity. People are human beings. So it just became that everything started to be a bit replaceable. And I suppose with that mentality, you start dating somebody thinking there's something better could come along. Whereas in the 80s, that wasn't what you were thinking and you weren't predisposed to that kind of mentality. Then economic pressure started to rewrite dating quite a lot. And we've been through a few crises financially in the last few years. So we've sort of had the, downturn post 2001, then the 2008 credit crunch, and then it's just been an ongoing cycle of financial crisis. When are we not in a financial crisis? So this has meant that people have also been getting independent later. So instead of buying our first houses in our mid-20s, we're now buying our first houses in our early to mid-30s. So that's changed if we're even able to afford them at all. And then there's less energy for emotional risk. We don't want to go through pain and heartbreak. We don't want to put ourselves in that. Mental health has become a big thing. And so we're a lot more careful about things like that. And then dating actually became a stress. if you're chatting to several people in the apps and it's going somewhere and then it's not going somewhere, and that can be a bit of a head mess. And we don't really want to put ourselves in those positions. And again, people can ghost you, and one minute you're chatting and the next minute you're not. And people seem to be ruder on the internet than they are in real life. Would they come up to you and say things about how you look? Probably not face to face, but on a screen, then that just seems like a different mentality. So that etiquette kind of disappeared as well. According to the Office for National Statistics, it says long run pressure since the late 1990s and continued strain in recent years has meant that housing affordability has been a big factor, and that it's not how it was 40 years ago. Student debt in England, according to government statistics, show the higher education loan balance reached 206.6 billion for the financial year 2024 to 25. Again, lots of people have taken on debt because it costs a lot more money. So this is, again, student debt we're talking about here. And this means that stability feels delayed. People often delay commitment milestones or date with more caution because they've got these financial burdens. They don't feel financially able to provide for a partner, or to have the lifestyle that they think comes with meeting somebody, getting married and having children. And you can, that's sensible, isn't it? So I suppose if you're not going to make those big commitments to somebody because you don't feel financially able to, does that mean dating becomes a hobby or an interest or just casual hookups? Potentially so, because you're not looking for forever. You're just looking for some fun and an escape from a reminder that you're not in a position to pursue something more serious. Social fabric and third places weakened. So we talked about going to bars and pubs and clubs to meet people, and that seems to be not the case now. Starting to not have those spaces, they're closing down. It's more of a coffee culture, isn't it, now in the UK than it was the heavy drinking. And a lot of people are, going alcohol free. And so that kind of thing that exacerbated the dating, or certainly made it quite fun back in the day, is probably not there in the same way it was. We're global as well, aren't we? So the people that we kind of are close to might not be geographically close to us. So we're not meeting people through friends the same way we used to. We're not sort of connecting people in quite the same way. Our emotional awareness has gone up, hasn't it? And that didn't lead to an increase in confidence. In fact, it's probably made people feel a lot more intimidated. We've got more language to describe the boundaries that we want, and our expectations are made clear. We're more probably comfortable saying no than people were 40 years ago. We're more fear of getting it wrong as well. So there's a self-consciousness to dating that perhaps wasn't there before. And higher standards mean higher anxiety. If you're looking for somebody that earns X amount, can provide, do this, has this level of education, who comes with all of these things, it's not just about how somebody looks. It actually is the full package. It's a bit like interviewing for a job. You're looking for a very specific requirements, aren't we? We are kinder, but we're actually much more cautious. And we're more afraid and we're more aware. And I suppose that self-reflective nature now, and looking for somebody that's really going to bring joy to us, has made dating a lot harder. So our psychological load is also higher. So loneliness, we hear about this loneliness crisis. It does seem to impact men slightly more than women. I'm not entirely sure why that is, and if that will always be the case. The Office for National Statistics found that 27% of adults reported feeling lonely at least some of the time in late 2023 and early 2024. And it talked about how loneliness was very much a bigger factor in mental health and mental health decline. So again, loneliness is a factor. And one thing that we're probably not thinking about is that intimacy patterns have shifted. So what do we mean by this? So according to the US General Social Survey analysis, showed declines in sexual frequency from the late 1990s to the early 2010s, partly linked to more people being unpartnered. And this matters culturally. Dating becomes less, everyone's doing it all the time, and more uneven. Some people very active and others are very disconnected. And could this link in to that loneliness that we talked about in the early statistic? I mean, why people aren't having as much sex is interesting between 1990s and the early 2010s. So I don't really know what was happening in that 15-20 year period. I mean, it is post the AIDS kind of, crisis, which probably, changed sexual behaviors and habits, and safe sex was a very prevalent thing. So I'm not entirely sure what the motivation behind that is, but it's certainly interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite heavy, but lots of things changed and lots of reasons why that changed, and that's changed the whole dating landscape for 2026. So what hasn't changed? Yes, actually, some things are consistent and have stayed the same. So what are these things? So first of all, people still fall for familiarity. We still want people that we see attributes that are kind of comfortable and safe: kindness, sincerity, authenticity, genuineness, maybe intelligence, humor, wit, those kinds of things. Interaction still grows through shared experiences. So actually, if you see somebody at the gym and you both work out a lot, then maybe that is a good basis for, having something in common and hanging out together. If you enjoy, Lego club and models and building, and you see somebody there, then you've got a commonality. The workplace still is, you can meet people in the workplace, especially if you've got like shared work goals or career aspirations. So, that is still fundamentally the same thing. We still want to feel chosen, safe, and understood. That's it. We want somebody to accept us for the human beings that we are, flaws and all. Nobody is perfect. So why are we putting such pressure on ourselves? You can grow as union, can't you? You can, I think being married, as long as I have been, it is about growing and changing and adapting. And the person that I was when my husband first met me in my early 20s is not the person that I am today, and vice versa. And we've been through lots of different seasons together and lots of different things, but we've grown together as people and always fundamentally had a friendship, which again, I don't always think people realize that the most successful relationships are based on friendship and familiarity and commonality. Those are never going to change, are they? We also know that rejection is always going to hurt. It hurt in the 80s, it will hurt now. Nobody wants to feel rejected. But we do need to think about what doesn't serve us, it doesn't fit with us. It's not a rejection, it's just not the right person in the right time. And eventually, hopefully we will all meet the person that is the person we're supposed to be with. And if we don't, that's fine. The person that's going to be with you all the way through your life is yourself, and you need to have the best relationship with who you are and be accepting of you and all your own flaws and foibles, because, at the end of the day, self-acceptance is probably the most important thing in the world, isn't it? Ooh, don't I sound really twee? So if dating feels confusing, that doesn't mean that you're broken. It means you're human and the system is weird. And actually, if we think about things that haven't changed about the system, then maybe we can anchor ourselves a little bit more. So what fundamentals are the same? So let's summarize this. Proximity still matters. People form relationships where their lives overlap, so shared routines, repeated contact, mutual friends, and apps can introduce us, but that proximity is still needed. So again, maybe retrain yourself to think about commonalities and things that you want to share in your own life, not what attributes so much you're looking for in an individual. Just think about what aspects of your life you want to share. Status and safety cues still matter. If somebody feels threatening and intimidating, they are not your person. If they make you feel nervous and anxious in a bad way, they are not your person. So accept the cues change from who you know to, our social kind of status. Attachment needs are stable. So we talk a lot about attachment, don't we? People still want to feel chosen, secure, understood, and they still fear rejection or embarrassment. So why are some of us putting people through the grueler? At the end of the day, if somebody's willing to go out there and date other human beings, then, they're just looking for the same thing you are. And, start with the game playing, just be a decent person and, be clear. I really enjoyed this. We should do it again. Or no, this isn't for me, but thank you for spending your time with me. I suppose sometimes our expectations need to line up in that respect. And I suppose that core trade-off stage, freedom, variety versus stability and depth. Tech amplified the freedom side, so we've got more freedom of choice. However, people now work harder to protect the depth side. And that's what we're looking for, that connection, that real human connection. And, that's the key thing here, isn't it? So these are all psychological and sociological variants, aren't they, that wrap these changes, but the fundamentals are the same: to be seen, to be accepted, to be valued, to be understood, to meet someone genuine, like-minded, and that is always going to be the same, isn't it, really? So that's kind of reassuring, I think. How do we make these into strategies? How can we help people that want to be successful in the world of dating should they choose to date? Because you don't have to date, you can be on your own. You are just a brilliant person individually as you are in a pair, and it can be more work to be in a pair than it can be to be on our own sometimes. So, this isn't a guide to dating or a guide to a lifestyle choice. This is just observational mental chatter in my head that is coming over to you. So, some practical advice then. So, let's make this into something we can use. So, stop treating dating like a performance, because it's not. Let's be more curious and interested in the people that we're dating, and not always like end gaming it. Let's be thinking about meeting new friends first and getting to try people on, but also enjoying people for who they are and what they kind of represent and value. Build attraction through repetition. So, doing familiar things, the same things. Are you doing the same shift a lot? Do you do the gym together? Are you using the same community space? Use apps as introductions, as a way of meeting people. So instead of thinking it as like, this life partner, think of it as just as your friend going, hey, my algorithm thinks you'll really get on with Jeremiah. Hey, my algorithm thinks you're going to get on with Martinez. Like, hey, my algorithm thinks that Kimberly is the person for you. So yeah, that's kind of what that is. It's not like defining characteristics. It's just a starting point, isn't it? Don't try and match with everybody. Try to be more discerning and think about making real life connections first and foremost, because that's when you really start to realize what somebody is like. So, go for a quiet coffee, go for a walk somewhere safe in daylight. Don't put the emotional investment up front. Reserve that, take it as this a little recce. You're just going to sort of explore and figure out if this person is somebody that you could connect with on a personal level. Slow isn't a failure. I mean, why are we trying to speed through things? Shouldn't we enjoy the dating process? Because eventually, if you are seeking to find a partner, once you're with that partner, if it's going to be long term, it's going to be long term for a really long time if it's your forever person or for a substantial amount of time person. So why are you rushing through dating and not maybe taking the time to enjoy that stage of your life or that stage of experience that you're going through? Even if this is like after a failed relationship or a serious relationship or a loss or bereavement and you're back in the dating field, enjoy this newfound part of your life and try to find the pleasure in it. We need to be rebuilding offline mixing, okay? So if weak third places push people into apps, then the antidote is more structured in-person repetition. So hobby groups, volunteering, sports leagues, community classes. So this is going to build our social capital. Use apps like introduction tools, as said, and given UK signs of swipe fatigue and declining usage in major apps, actually, we are really over the apps. I feel this myself and I am not even on them. So if I'm picking up on these vibes, then, that must be a thing. Intentionality is a differentiator here. Fewer matches, faster move to real life interaction, and clearer boundaries. Normalize slow dating. So when housing debt and insecurity rise, sustainable dating becomes lower cost, low performance, daytime dates, walk and talk, shared activities, more honest talk time. So this, talking to each other and not having your screen on the go at the same time. Have more of a real lived experience. Go look at an art gallery together, guys. Attend the theatre. Do some cultural stuff. Treat mental health as part of your dating infrastructure. So if it's really bringing you down, then you get off the apps and you go spend some time on your own and with people that make you feel happy and joyous. Loneliness is widespread and mental health burden is real. So we're not undermining that in any way, shape, or form. And dating advice that ignores regulation, pacing, and emotional safety is actually outdated. So if you're feeling threatened and insecure or vulnerable on the apps, then no, you don't need to pursue that. You need to take that time for yourself. And I suppose we also need to be culturally resetting ourselves. Let's decenter perfection. Perfection doesn't exist, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And what you deem to be your ideal partner or person is going to be unique to you. Not everybody likes leeking potato soup. Not everybody likes kimchi. Not everybody likes chocolate milkshakes. I mean, we've all got our own tastes and preferences, and we need to be comfortable with our own tastes and preferences. Because somebody else likes that type of person doesn't mean we have to like that type of person. Don't be so influenced by other people. Really consider what it is that you want. So social media encourages highlight reel comparison. I always think those who are constantly displaying things on social media are putting too much, like, sometimes social media is the lie we tell ourselves. Think about that. So we will put those pictures of our perfect moments, their kids unwrapping their Christmas presents in their matching pajamas, getting proposed to on a big bridge, wearing the spangly dress. Sometimes we want everything to be this perfect moment, but actually there's still the reality behind that. Not every perfect relationship online is a perfect relationship. Not every person who doesn't post anything isn't doing nothing in their life. We need to be a little bit more discerning about that. Let's think about the values that we have and what we're looking for in partners. Think about, kindness under stress, decentering, what the apps and social media and online is telling us, and think more about real life experiences and real life things we need. Look at the friendship group that you have. There must be things that link your friends together, and maybe those sort of attributes that you have in your friends you might be looking for in a partner. So there we go. Some strategies. Whether they're useful or not, I don't know. And whether this is just a brain dump, maybe that's what this is, but hopefully there is something useful here for you. As usual, this one looks like it could be a bit of a beast. I also feel like I need to edit quite a lot of waffle out of this one, so I'll try and keep it succinct. So what's our big picture takeaway here? The best relationship balance seems to emerge when people have these attributes: offline social skill foundations, some tech but not total immersion, emotional literacy without self-obsession, economic stability enough to plan, cultural permission to choose but not infinite choice. That combo is important. Okay, so I also did a little insect, and originally this video was based on an article called Why Gen Z Can't Date, which was in The Guardian a while back. And then I've come back to it because I've been ruminating on it. And obviously I'm not here to judge any generation, or again, everyone's experiences are personal and unique to them. I was privileged to grow up in an era, as I've said before, the dating apps and this different way of kind of forming relationships. And, I think a lot of older millennials and Gen Xers seem to have not had the trouble or the issues that maybe some people have had. I posed the question, which generation has the best balance for dating in the last sort of 50 years or so? And there isn't any clean data on this to really give an answer to this question. But what we can say with some confidence is that late Gen X and older millennials, so those roughly born from the mid-1970s to the late 80s, often have a structural sweet spot when it comes to dating. So they had lots of offline third places and face-to-face socialization before smartphones dominated. And that's a big indicator that part of our problem is the smartphone and our dependence on it and our addiction to it, plus the option of early online dating later. And that mix can reduce the always on mentality that maybe younger people have, and that app fatigue. We weren't on the apps. If I could be at home and not be thinking about dating because I was at home having a cup of tea, watching the TV. And for me to meet somebody was in very set places, wasn't it? The bar, the club, the office, the lecture hall, those were the places where I might meet somebody. I wasn't going to be meeting them in my house. So I wasn't always thinking about things in that way. And I imagine a lot of my contemporaries were like that as well. So yeah, and then Gen Z, though, has more tools at their disposal and more choice, more cultural clarity around consent and their identity and their sexual identity, but also more digital saturation and economic drag. which can make dating feel harder to start and harder to sustain. And this is a statistic for us. For example, about half of US adults aged 18 to 29 have used a dating app/site. And this is research from Pew Research Center, February 2023. And that encompasses Gen Z, doesn't it? And I suppose the interesting question is, what are Gen Alpha going to be doing? I mean, what's dating going to look like for them? Because I think they're going to be coming out of the other side. And I think it's going to be interesting because Gen Alpha kids are going to be predominantly raised by millennial parents, maybe younger Gen Xers, elder Gen Z, Gen Z. They are Gen Z. I'm British. Why do I call them Gen Z? Just thought about that. Anyway. So yeah, lots to think about there. I've just gone off on a tangent. Don't you love it when I go off on a tangent? No, you don't. I know. So that was some observations on dating and how it's changed in the last 40 years. And boy, has it changed. And there's a lot to think about there. So I don't know if this video has helped or hindered you, but it's certainly, hopefully, giving you something to think about. And I think one of the main things about this channel is to give us food for thought and things to reflect on and take things into consideration. So whether you're dating, whether you're single, whether you're a long-term partnership, whether you are polyamorous, whatever your choice of, relationship status is, I hope that you're happy and content and that you realize that the most important person that you have to be accountable to is yourself, and you need to be comfortable and happy with who you are. And I think when you're happy and comfortable with who you are, you often draw the people to you that maybe most align with you. So that's kind of maybe the end note here. And yeah, it's always interesting to look at human beings. We are odd little people, aren't we? And we do lots of weird things. I mean, I don't think animals are struggling in the animal kingdom, are they? But we obviously over-intellectualize things now, and we've taken it to the nth degree. They're kind of forgotten maybe some of the fundamentals and basics. So hopefully we can draw some of that from this video. So hopefully it wasn't too waffly. I really enjoyed looking into this. Obviously, as always, I love hearing your thoughts, your insights. Are you dating? Have you dated? Have you given up dating? Do you look at people that are dating and think, why? Do you envy people that are dating? I don't know. We all come from different walks of life. But if you have any thoughts, feel free. Let me know. I love listening to what you have to say. And I'm going to leave it there for now. So take care. I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now. Bye.